Well, welcome to the Empowered to Connect podcast, where we come together to discuss a healing-centered approach to engagement and well-being for ourselves, our families, and our communities. I'm JD Wilson, and I'm your host. And today on the show, we've got Dr. Jamie DeLuna, who's a research scientist at the Karyn Purvis Institute of Child Development at TCU. She's a brilliant researcher and has done a ton of work on adult attachment styles. You'll hear her talk about everything from being trained in a pretty intense course where she was taught how to conduct adult attachment interviews, and then walk through each of the adult attachment styles that exist. And one of the things that I would encourage you to do is to go through this episode with a notebook or some way of taking notes, whether it's your notes app or pen and paper, computer, whatever it is. Just be ready to take some notes on this topic as you're listening, because this is one of those episodes, one of these topics that as you start to learn more about it, it really necessitates some more self-work. Why do I tick the way I do? What makes me function the way I do? Why am I so triggered by this or that thing that my kids do? This is just one of those topics that is, I think, essential listening, essential work as a parent. And ultimately what it does is helps us to set a foundation for secure attachment for our kids and for us to work towards secure attachment ourselves. So without any further delay, let me bring to you now Dr. Jamie DeLuna. Well, as we mentioned in the opening, we're here with Jamie DeLuna from TCU, and she is probably the first scientist you're going to hear from today during your day. That is her official title at TCU is research scientist, but I'll let her share more about that. Jamie, thanks for coming on. Why don't you share with us what you do at TCU and why scientist is your title?
That's a really good question. I suppose it's my title because I have those letters after my name, PhD. But it's sort of a misnomer, because what I really do is I talk to a lot of people about attachment. I talk to a lot of people about their childhoods. It sounds very Freudian, but I get to talk to people from all over the world about their history and how their history impacts them and how attachment impacts their relationships with their kids, with their spouses, with their coworkers, with their friends. And a cool thing about what I do now is I'm getting to teach people on our team how to do that too. And that's awesome. Really neat. So I'm growing our team to also make that impact.
That's awesome. So for people who are listening to this and they have no idea kind of what the context is for that, why don't you kind of go back a little bit and explain how you guys got into that at the Institute, and then why that was such a draw for you in particular?
So attachment is the heart and soul of TBRI, trust-based relational intervention. I mean, it's, if you just look at the name of TBRI, right? Trust. Yeah. Attachment is trust. Yeah. Attachment is relationship. And so you can't have a trusting relationship without attachment. And so when we teach and help professionals work with families and children, the tongue-in-cheek way I always say it is half of that interaction is the family or the child or the parent, and the other half is us. And so we have a responsibility to know what we bring to the table, what we bring to the interaction. And that often is not the first thing on our mind, but it's really important.
Yeah. All right. So Jamie, if you don't mind, why don't we kind of tell me about, so you go to get your PhD and you come back to the Institute to work, and then you began doing these interviews, these assessments as part of kind of TBRI training. And so why don't we kind of walk through that and why that was so interesting to you and necessary for part of the training?
Those are two really good questions. So I'll answer the first one first, which is why it's so interesting. And the thing I always say, and I did not come up with this, somebody else told me this, but it's me search, right? We all come to what we do because of our own history. So I say parenting. I study attachment history because of my own attachment history, right? Like I know now that I wanted to make sense of my own history.
Oh, that's really good.
And that's what got me interested in it. And so that's the passion behind why I do what I do.
Yeah.
And the reason of why we have everybody who comes through TBRI practitioner training do this is because relationship is dyadic. It's two parts. It's two people. When I serve a child or a family, half of that interaction is them and the other half is me. And if I'm leaving the me out, that's half of it. I have to know what I bring to the table. What I'm bringing from my history is so important.
Yeah. Well, and I've shared with you off air. I mean, one of the things that we've talked about seemingly in every episode this season and kind of the tail end of last season is how often that theme comes into our own parenting. We inevitably we get super frustrated at something a kid says or something that is done or we're kind of evaluating later, making sense of it. And when we can't find a rationale for it, it's like, oh, that's probably because there's something weird in my history that triggers that in a way that it shouldn't. And so it sends you down a different rabbit hole to fix what you thought was a kid problem, and really it's probably something that you are primarily the one that needs to do some work on.
Yes. Well, and I think the question becomes then, what is it about my history that makes that bother me, right? What is it about me or my history that bothers me, that triggers me?
Yeah.
We flip it, and that maybe gives us a clarity or a clear answer on it that we didn't have before.
Right. A more frustrating answer, probably. That we can't just pawn it off on somebody else.
Oh, for sure. Nope.
I think maybe the best place to go next would just be, why don't we sort of just jump into attachment and adult attachment. And, we talked about it being sort of the foundation of all relationships, but, and we had Dr. Call from TCU talking about attachment styles, and we talked more about kind of kid attachment styles in that interview. Why don't we talk more today about the adult attachment styles and how they develop, and then walk through some of the different ones if we can do that.
Yeah. So I think the best place to start there, and I'll mention the child styles because they're connected, right? We were all kids at some point. And I think the best place to start is secure, because the thing that's always been impressed into me in my learning is that in order to understand atypical development, like when things don't go typically, you have to understand typical development. You have to understand the way it should go, or you would hope it would go. Yeah. And so secure attachment is the way we hope it goes, right? Yeah. And that's a history that's, the way you always hear it is warm and consistent parenting. Okay. The way that I'm going to say it is a parent who is able to give what we call instrumental care. So they meet the physical needs, right? If you're hungry, I'm going to give you a snack. If you're bleeding, I'm going to give you a Band-Aid. I'm going to be able to be the room mom or the soccer mom. I'll play a game with you. I'll do the activities, the things. That's instrumental care. But if I'm a secure parent, I can also do what we call nurturing care, like the deep emotional care. Yeah. And the example I always give of that is like, if you have a bad day, I'm just with you. I don't tell you it's going to be okay. I don't try and cheer you up. I don't give you a solution. I just say, JD, you're really sad. Yeah. And that's it. Full stop. There's no but, there's no and. I'm just holding space for your emotion. And the secure parent can do both of those. They can balance those. And so the result is, and this is where we get into the adult style, the result is I learn who I am. I learn that I'm valuable. I learn that my voice means something. I learn that all my feelings are okay. I learn that it's okay to just have negative feelings sometimes, but then it's also okay to have positive feelings. It's okay to feel the full spectrum, right? Yeah. And somebody is going to help me through that. And so as an adult, I know who I am. I know who I am in relationship. I know who I am outside a relationship. That's the autonomous self. And so I bring my full self to life as an adult. And so as an adult, if I'm a secure adult, they can look back at their past and say, there were some really good things about my parent, my mom or my dad. But you know what? There were some things I would change. Yeah. And they don't minimize it. and they don't get angry about it. It's just honest, it's balanced, and they can sit with that.
So I think an important thing to kind of point out there is you're not saying that secure attachment is a result of perfect parenting.
No, not at all. If you think you had a perfect childhood, you're probably not securely attached with yourself. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, well, yeah, because
none of us had a perfect childhood.
Yeah, I think all of us who are parenting right now need to hear that, right? Like just to remember that, okay, well, maybe this morning we had an issue getting ready for school and it's unresolved as the kid goes off to school. And I'm not here now lamenting and grieving and, like weeping at work, like, oh, I've ruined this secure attachment. Like, it's more than just getting it right. Like it's learning how to human well and being there for your kids, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want my kids to have a perfect childhood. I want them to be able to live in the world that's not perfect.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
I often say I want them to be just messed up enough to be funny, which is, not true. But truly, I want them to be able to live in a world that's not perfect.
Yeah.
And if I am trying to give them a perfect experience, one, that's an impossible standard. I'm never going to meet that. And two, they're not going to be able to live in the world.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I think that is. I was at a conversation with friends earlier today, and they are just in a tough season. And they just said, I think the good reminder is that there's not some people who have it together and some people that are struggling like us. Like everyone's struggling like us, and only some of us are honest. And I think that is the key reminder, I think, as a parent. Like, we are all going through stuff. Because if none of us are perfect, then nothing perfect exists in the world. It's all an ebb and flow in this beautiful kind of like rupture and repair dance that we do back and forth. And the better that we can get at that, the better chance we have of making it. That's so good.
And I think one of the things we often say with TBRI is it's better to err and repair than to never err at all.
Yeah.
Our kids just need to see us repair. They don't need to see us be perfect. I mean, this morning, I have a 7-year-old and she woke up on the wrong side of the bed and she was grumpy. And you know what came out of my mouth? Please don't start this day off bad for all of us. That wasn't what I wanted to say, but I said it. And then later on the way to school, I said, that is not how I wanted to show up for you.
Yeah.
And I'm really sorry. Here's what I wanted to say. It's okay for you to feel that. And let's think of some silver linings of today for you.
Yeah.
Both of those can happen. That's what I wanted to say.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Man. All right. So we get secure attachment from being warm and consistent, right? From being there, from being able to do instrumental and nurturing care. And where would you go next in explaining attachment after that?
Okay. So there's secure attachment. And then there are different types of insecure attachment. So it's still attachment. It's not whether or not a child is attached. It's not more or less attachment. It's how are they attached. So there's secure attachment and there are different types of insecure attachment.
So what you're going to say is not in order of lower grades of attachment, right? Like the next one isn't a B, then a C, then a D.
It's like different flavors.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, great.
It's just different flavors. Yeah, one's not more or less attached than the other. So I'm just going to pull one out of the air. The next one, so as a child, it's called anxious avoidant.
Okay.
And as an adult, it's called dismissing. They're the same category. Just when you're a child, it's called one thing. When you're an adult, it's called another thing. And so this is the parent who is really, really good at instrumental care. They are ready with the cookies after school. Yeah. They are ready with the new school clothes. They are the room mom. They are at all of the events, the basketball games, the gymnastics meets. They are on it.
Yeah.
Nurturing care is a little bit outside of their comfort zone. They're not as good or as comfortable with the big emotions. This is not about whether or not parents love their kids. Right. That's off the table.
Yep.
It's not about that. It's about patterns. It's about comfort zones, and it's usually about history. If my parents weren't great at that, then I'm probably not going to be great at that, right? Because I didn't have that model.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
experience of the child is, okay, if my parent's not super comfortable with negative emotions, like if it's okay to be happy in my house, but when I'm sad or when I'm angry or when I'm scared, I go to my room, or I go outside and I shoot the basketball,
Yeah.
or I go listen to music. If I do that by myself, then I learn to keep those in.
Yeah.
And so as an adult, if I'm talking to an adult who had that model, they keep that stuff in, and guess what comes out? The positive. This is the adult who says, no, it was great. It was Leave It to Beaver. Everything was fine. Everything was great.
Yeah.
And I say, well, tell me about a time when you got hurt. And they'll say, well, I didn't get hurt. And I'll say, well, was there anything you were scared of as a child? And they'll say, no. And I'll say, well, okay. What about a time you got sick? And they'll say, well, no, I didn't get sick. And I'll say, well, just tell me what it was like to be sick in your house as a child. And they'll tell me instrumental care. This is the parent who set you up on the couch. They set you up with movies. They got you a cold washcloth. They made you soup, which is great, right? If you don't do that, a lot of times it's called neglect. But what I'm listening for is, did they also come rub your back? Did they sit with you and look at you in the eye and say, I'm so sorry you're feeling bad?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that balance is hard as a parent.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What do you find that there are usually similar stories or similar hurts in somebody's childhood that sort of lends to that? Or does it just normally mirror some of a parent style? Or do there tend to be, like, you hear similar trends from those childhoods that produce a dismissing adult? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's a trend of a lot of instrumental care.
Okay.
And not as much nurturing care. But you know what another interesting trend is because the pattern is keep the negative in, push it down, everything's okay. Because we have practiced that for so long, we learn to believe it. So this is the adult who says, no, but my childhood really was perfect.
Yeah.
Nothing went wrong. Everything was good. My parents were great. I didn't have anything that was bad. And this is woven into our culture in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
Like, Frozen, let it go. That is avoidant dismissing, right? Conceal, don't feel, let it go.
Right,
we are teaching this to our children.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. There's a whole side. I listened to a whole side podcast from Malcolm Gladwell about how The Little Mermaid was, one of the most dangerous movies for a kid to watch ever. So it's an interesting thing you should go back and listen to. But it's along those same lines. Like, it's not teaching healthy adult behavior from kids. Like and so I think you find that a lot within Disney. But those things are usually just mirroring culture, right? They're usually just mirroring our personalities. And so I get it.
Yeah. Well, and these are interesting stories. They're interesting characters, right? You don't find a lot of secure storylines in television and movies because it's not interesting.
Right.
That's not an interesting history. Like, it's kind of vanilla.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah. If her story is not let it go, it's just her, like, grieving quickly and then going back to ruling the kingdom. Like, it's just kind of like, well, that's a 5-minute movie.
Yeah. Or like, well, my parents balanced instrumental and nurturing care really well. And now I'm a healthy adult princess who has dealt with my stuff. It's like, all right, well.
Okay. Good. Well, we got that one covered now. All right. So moving on outside of anything else you want to say on anxious avoidant?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think we're good. Let's move on. So they're anxious ambivalent. Also has anxious in the name. Different kind of anxious. So anxious avoidant keeps it in, right? The model is push it down, build the wall, don't show it, conceal, don't feel.
Yeah.
Anxious ambivalent. As an adult, it's called preoccupied. And this is the most complicated one because it can look like all the other ones. And this comes from a caregiving model that's inconsistent. So sometimes the parent is really good. They are able to show up. Sometimes they're not. It's inconsistent.
Yeah.
And for the child, that's really confusing.
Yeah.
So, and you can think of examples when that might happen. So one common example that I give is like a parent who is perhaps an alcoholic or substance abuse, where, when they're using, they're not available emotionally. And when they're not, they are available emotionally. Now, it's not the case that those two are always related, but commonly. But the experience of the child is that it's inconsistent. Sometimes my parent's available for me emotionally, and sometimes they're not. And so the child gets frustrated and angry. One of the best ways I've ever heard attachment explained is that it's the child's best way to keep their caregiver close.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So with secure, the pattern is very consistent. Oh, I just let you know I need you.
Yeah.
And you're available, right?
Yeah.
That's how I keep you close. With anxious avoidant, I handle it myself because you'll stay close to me. If I let those negative feelings out, you will tell me to go shoot the basketball or go to my room or go write in my journal.
Or I'll let you know what time practice is. I don't let you know that I'm getting bullied at practice.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So I don't let that stuff out because you will shy away from that. So I keep it in because that's how I keep you close.
Yeah.
With anxious ambivalent, it's inconsistent. So sometimes the parent is available. And so it's confusing for the child. And so the child it becomes almost like needy, right? Yeah. I'm gonna let it out all the time because you might be available this time.
Man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's and it feels for the parent, it feels really draining.
Yeah.
Because the fascinating part of this is, as the adult, you're not aware of this pattern, right? I'm not aware of this insecure pattern. I don't realize it's me that's bringing this on.
Right.
And so I'm going, now, wait a second. Why are you doing this?
Yeah.
And it's because I'm being inconsistent in my emotional care. But the child is frustrated. Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Or you hear as a kid.
I've heard it described as leaky anger.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great description of it. Like, I'm just thinking of it. You hear as a kid, like, I just did that. We just went on a bike ride. Like, we just did this, and you want to do it again? I mean, can't you ever entertain yourself like that? Yeah. That tends to be a common thing there. Yeah, that is. And I think as a parent, so I'll say, like, having gone through this process, like, and being more aware of my own stuff, I think this is maybe my biggest fear as a parent is, like, being aware of it and knowing, like, oh, I'm passing something on. Like, I'm passing something on to my kids. And so I'll think about an inconsistent moment. I'll think, like, they're going to be ambivalent. This is all my fault.
Yeah.
And so,
well, and that's the pattern, because so I come from this history, and our pattern is we learn to read our parents' emotional temperature, but not our own.
Gosh.
Because we're trying to figure out, why is it that sometimes they're available and sometimes they're not? And so we're trying to read their emotional temperature all the time, and we never figure out our own. A lot of times people will tell me it felt like I was walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
And that relationship feels out of our control. Yeah. And so a lot of times this happens. Okay, well, if I can't control this relationship, what can control me? Really good. I'll do everything right the first time. I'll be a high achiever. I'll be an overachiever. I'll be a perfectionist. I'll be a people pleaser. And that's what we become, right? Yeah. So we're the person that goes, like, did I answer that question okay? Did I do that right? Did I give you what you're looking for there? Right? We're that person, because that's what we did with our parent. Are you available this time? Is this the time you can connect with me? Is this a good time for you? Right? That's our pattern. We've been trained in it.
Yeah. This is the history I come from as well. And I think the scary thing for me is I knew my pattern was achieve really high, make sure everyone loves me, make sure that, when I'm out in public, everyone's always giving me compliments, and then just find subversive ways to hide the rest, right? So whatever the ugly stuff is, just get real slippery in those areas and not get pegged for it because you don't want to embarrass the family, but also you're not quite sure how to figure those things out. Like those areas that you, like for me, I mean, this is sounds so dumb to everybody else. Going to class when I got to college, I was like, oh, no one's over my shoulder making sure I go to class? Well, I'm not going to class. And it came back to bite me, obviously, later on. That's a different story. But, it was this unlearning of I've got to do the things that I'm being watched for, and I didn't know how to handle the stuff that was harder. It just wasn't, there wasn't a consistent model for that. And so, yeah, that's really, gosh, it's tough. All right, so do you find that oftentimes, again, these are just repeating patterns, or are there other trends that are interesting that stick out in this attachment style as well?
A lot of it's just repeating patterns. It makes me think, though. So I teach an undergrad class, and last night we were talking about. Are you familiar with Brene Brown?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, so she's a researcher at the University of Houston who talks about many amazing things, but she talks about shame and vulnerability.
Yeah.
And we were talking specifically about perfectionism, which is common with preoccupied attachment. And we were watching a video clip of her, and she was talking about perfectionism is just like hiding shame, right? Because if we say, oh, well, I'm just a perfectionist, it's just hiding. It's just like a cover up for what we really are shameful about, right?
Gosh,
like if I could just pretend like I'm just really good at this, then we're just hiding the shame of what we don't want somebody to see.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is really fascinating because it keeps us from being seen.
Yes. Mo and Tana say all the time, like if families are describing, one child who's just the star of the family, and they're always, like this one is never giving us any issues, they'll always say, like, that's the one you got to watch out for. And not like they're pegging the sneakiness coming, but like that's the one you have to pay extra careful attention to nurture and to make sure that they know they're free to fail. Like they're free to make mistakes. Make sure they know they're free and they're secure no matter what they do. Like they're not going to lose your attention or affection. And that's a tough thing to do. I mean, we've got 4 kids, and like, it is tough to keep tabs on those things and to be aware of that all the time. And so, yeah, I think, you mentioned like coming back to repair in the car. And I think, one thing that we've tried to make a habit is anytime that there's a particularly big blow up or of some sort, before there's any kind of repair, like we usually start that process by just saying, hey, I do want you to remember, like I'm really frustrated right now, but there is nothing you could ever do to cause me to stop loving you or paying attention to you or watching out for you. Like you could do this kind of stuff the rest of your life, and I wouldn't like it, obviously, but I will never stop being there for you. And I think that, and a lot of times it's met with an eye roll because we have preteens, but I think that does eventually, like those narratives do eventually kind of catch traction. And it is just so important to remember those things, because I think that is ultimately how we all feel, right? Like we do want our kids to come to us. We do want them, like you said, you might have an insecure attachment, but it does not mean that there's not love for your kids there and a desire to make sure that they are getting everything they need,
Yeah. In our family, a mantra that we use a lot is I'm still learning. Like for us, my husband and I, and for our kids, right? Like I'm still learning. And I say that all the time. I am still learning how to be a parent to a 7-year-old and a 1-year-old. I'm still learning. It's the first time I've been a parent to a 7-year-old. It's the second time for the 1-year-old, but she's a different 1-year-old than
it's the first time I parented a second child.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And my 7-year-old's still learning how to be a 7-year-old, and my 1-year-old's still learning how to be a 1-year-old.
Oh, that's so good.
But I'm still learning. And you're right. We say it enough that now my child says it.
Yeah. 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 That's so good. That's so good. Anything else to add on this attachment style?
No, but I think one thing I do want to say before we get too far in is that, if we had an insecure attachment as a child, we're not stuck there forever. We can move to secure as an adult. It's called earned secure. We can earn our security. We can do the work. We can deal with our stuff. We can process it. We can come out the other side and be secure as an adult. Yeah. So we're not doomed forever.
And we're gonna put a pin in that statement and come back to that after we walk through the others, because I think that's it's a great reminder right now to not be like, well, I'm not listening to the rest of this because this is terrible.
Right.
We will
I just want to put that out there. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna get to the silver lining and like the hope piece after we finish talking about these styles. So what comes next?
So I'm going to explain this. There's a style as a child called disorganized.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist as an adult. There's no disorganized as an adult.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's commonly confused. And here's where research Jamie is going to come just swoop in and explain it. So disorganized attachment as a child happens when a child is in a situation where the parent is frightening to the child. So perhaps the parent is abusive or neglectful or both. Or the parent themselves is frightened, right? They're parenting from a place where they are frightened. So maybe they are being abused. Disorganized attachment. And the reason it's called disorganized is because the child doesn't have a clear strategy for keeping their caregiver close. There's no pattern.
Okay.
So those patterns that I described to you, that doesn't exist in disorganized. If you showed me 100 kids who were disorganized in their attachment, they would all look really, really different in their strategies to keep their caregiver close. So that's disorganized attachment. It does not exist as an adult. There's no one-to-one equivalent.
Okay.
What we look at in adults is something called unresolved. And it's called unresolved loss or trauma. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's, have you experienced a loss, so like a death or a trauma of any kind, that you haven't fully processed, that you haven't fully integrated into how you think about relationship and who you are now as an adult. And the reason not directly related to disorganized as a child, there are several reasons, but one of the main ones is because that loss or trauma could be something that happened when you were a child, or it could be something that happened 5 years ago. So it's not necessarily related to your childhood relationship with your parents, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It could have happened along the way. But the impact of that as an adult, and specifically as a parent, is if I have a loss or a trauma that I have not processed, that I have not fully integrated into how I think about things, that's a problem. Trauma impacts the way I parent. It just will, even if I fully processed it. But the benefit of processing it, the benefit of knowing that it's going to impact me, is that when it does come up, I can go, okay, this is what's happening. This is why I'm reacting to this the way that I am. Let me take a step back. Let me take a deep breath. Let me realize what's happening here. But if I haven't done that work, man, that's going to catch me off guard.
Yes.
And it's going to look different when my child is a baby versus when my child is a preteen versus when my child starts driving, right? Versus when my child maybe moves out of the house. Like that's going to look really different. And if that's not on my radar, that's going to be tough.
Yeah. And so in those situations, I mean, generally you're going to recommend that you have somebody familiar with, working through that trauma, whether it be a counselor, a therapist, anywhere in that world, to then help you to recognize those things as you're going through and recognize how to process them well, right?
I think that's the goal. Absolutely. I mean, I think everybody should go to therapy. That's my own personal belief. And I think one of the things that's really tough about loss and trauma is that the processing and the kind of the path is different for everybody. I mean, don't you wish I could just say like, oh, you just do these 3 things and then you're done?
Yes,
that'd be amazing. That's not how it works. So for some people, the first step is journaling. For some people, the first step is talking to a friend, and then it's talking to a counselor. For some people, they're ready to jump right in to therapy.
Right.
It's different for everybody.
So is there a point that you would say like, well, no, I guess you kind of said that. I mean, you recommend everyone has therapy or goes to therapy of some sort, right? I mean, I would co-sign that also. Like, I didn't have any, big T traumas or big L losses as a kid. And yet, like, I've found counseling to be one of the most helpful tools in my adult life that I could have ever asked for. And so So I would advise it as well. I mean, because I think a lot of times we tend to think of it in terms of like, well, I didn't witness X, Y, or Z very hard thing or have this happen to me. So like, I just need to suck it up. Whereas, like, I think if we think of it in medical terms, like you wouldn't deal with the nagging headache for 8 years, right? Like you wouldn't deal with like an arm you think might be broken, but just sort of muscle through it for a long time. Or some of us will, but like you shouldn't medically. And so it's kind of the same thing with our mental health, right?
Absolutely. Well, in even another way to think about it is like I go to the gym 3 times a week because I want to keep my body in shape.
Yeah.
I go to therapy every other week because I want to keep my mind in good shape for my family and my kids.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really helpful. So those are kind of our adult attachment styles that we've walked through now. So we, for people who are listening to this and thinking through those, are there some ways to kind of, would maybe journaling and kind of thinking back through childhood begin to be kind of your best first step in this awareness process?
Yeah, I think thinking about childhood isn't necessarily something we all do every day. Um,
Right.
That's kind of one of the cool things about what I get to do for a living is talk to people about their childhoods. And that's not something we do routinely as an adult.
Yeah.
And I think it's a unique thing to do. And it's a unique challenge because we don't always think about that. There's a really cool book called How We Love.
Okay.
And it's by Yurkovic and Yurkovic. It's a married couple who are therapists. And the reason I'm bringing this up is twofold. One, they talk about attachment and the different styles and how they operate in a marriage relationship or a romantic relationship. And two, because they talk about a single question that they use in their therapy practice, which is, can you remember a specific time that one of your parents comforted you? And like, what an interesting question, right? And that's, challenging ourselves to remember an instance of nurturing care is really interesting, right? Can you remember a time your parent was nurturing with you? And that's it, right? Not that and then they said, here's what you do about this, or, and then they did instrumental care. No. Just time they were nurturing. That's it. And here's the challenge with that. Not this kind of example. Well, every night they tucked me in and gave me a hug. No. I'm talking about one time this specific thing happened and then the story of it, right? Like a very specific instance. Because that's hard to do.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think, what I did when I kind of think back through that in my own head is I started to kind of qualify, like, well, maybe that counts, or maybe that does. And then you have to really think about, you end up thinking about a lot more than just that. So we're trying to think. And so they recommend thinking about a time that you were comforted. Are there other kind of milestones or things that you need to think about when you're working through these things? Like, should we be aiming to kind of write down a few different observations of different things?
I would say think about being balanced when you think about your relationship with your parents. When I look back, do I see my parents as heroes? And if I do, what does that tell me? Am I able to think about things I would want to change about that relationship? Because healthy attachment as an adult is balanced. I can look back and I can say, I loved this about my relationship with my mom. Or many of us can, but I can also say, you know what? I didn't love this so much. Yeah. And I don't have to minimize it and I don't have to qualify it. I can just let it be. And then I think another important thing is if I can't think of those examples, if I can't say, wow, this was the time that my parent really nurtured me, then what is that? Can I be really honest about that and say, you know what? I think I needed that. And I didn't get it. Yeah. I didn't get that. Man.
So we write these things down, kind of think about these a little bit. And the advice is not to then call your parents and reveal your findings, right? Like that's not your first step.
Not necessarily. No, I think some people might have that relationship. That is probably not the majority of us. I think the answer of what to do with that information consistent is, again, really different for everybody.
Yeah.
But I think it can inform the way that we parent, right? If my parents did mostly instrumental care, that's probably what I do. That's probably how I show up.
Yeah.
And if my parents were inconsistent in their nurturing care, that's probably how I show up. And that's hard.
Yeah.
That is really hard.
So what every achiever or perfectionist who's listening to this is going to ask then is, well, that's fine. Tell me how to get to earn secure then.
How do I get there? How do I get there? And again, I will say to you, don't you wish that I had,
of course,
like a 5-step program?
Right.
I do not.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that it's a lot of intentionality. One of the things I often say is awareness is a tangible step. Being aware of this stuff, having it on your radar, having it in your mind is going to change the way you operate.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's almost like that Wizard of Oz thing. Like once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
once
that is
you know
really
this,
true.
you can't unknow it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you got to be honest with yourself about it. And that's one of the hardest parts. That's a hard part about it.
Yeah.
Is to be really honest with yourself about what you excel at and what you don't.
And, I would imagine that the advice would also be like within the confines of a safe relationship, bringing somebody else into that with you, right? Like bringing somebody else into this sort of awareness with you to just kind of even help you recognize some of these things. Like, would you recommend that?
Oh, 100,000%. So one of the things I struggle with as someone with a history of anxious ambivalent, and now I say recovering emotional temperature thing. So we have a tendency as adults, because I don't have a good grasp on my own emotional temperature, I let my emotional temperature set the emotional temperature for the whole family. So if I'm having a bad day, everybody's having a bad day.
Yeah.
Do you know how hard that is for me to say out loud? That is really hard to admit, and it is very true. If I'm grumpy, everybody gets to be grumpy, right?
Yeah.
The contrast is true too. Like if I'm having a great day, everybody's having a great day.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's been really helpful for me is for my husband to just be like, Jamie, emotional temperature. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, got it. And it's just like a little nudge.
Yeah.
Just a little nudge.
Yeah.
And I can reset. I can take 5
really
minutes.
good.
I can take a breath and just reset.
Yeah.
Reset. And then I think opposites attract is often true with attachment because he leans the other way. He's kind of the anxious avoidant dismissing.
Yeah.
And so his is more, he's really good at the instrumental. And I have to go like, okay, babe, feelings. So like our 7-year-old had a loose tooth recently and he's like, got to pull it out. We got to get to the solution. And I was like, feelings. And he was like, and how do you feel? Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling, but
That's
being
really
that helper to each other is really important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, does this also kind of change the way that we take our own kids' temperature? Like, do we pay special attention to obviously I would think like each of us have differences within our kids that necessitate different ways of instrumental care, different ways of nurturing care. And so maybe paying attention to those things as well so that sort of, what means the world to one might not mean the exact same to the other. And so one might appreciate the back rubbing way more than showing up at practice. And the other one might need you there at practice to feel nurtured, every step of the way. So I said it's also like one that we have found to be more important as well. Like knowing our kids and being students of them.
Yes. That's such a good point. The family's a system.
Yeah.
And that gets really complicated really fast because inevitably you will have children who are opposites from one another. And like we have 2 kids and one is a snuggler and one is not. And I mean, you gotta know your kids, right? Like that's really important to one and it's not to the other.
Yeah.
And so how do I show up in a nurturing way for the one who's not, because that's not the way for her.
Right.
So yeah, you're right. Anchoring and adjusting is a big part of that.
Yeah.
It's hard, easier said than done, right? Like this stuff it's hard and it's tiring. Like practicing secure attachment and being intentional about it, it's exhausting, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. What I think, kind of as we sort of round back to the home base here, like get back to the beginning of this conversation, like all of these things can give us awareness, and we can be aware of our own mistakes, and aware of things that we're doing wrong. And ultimately, it does require help for us to be able to do these things. And consistently begin to improve. And so it's finding, bringing that friend or partner in, it's bringing that family member into this conversation. It's, being willing to do the work of being honest about your past, and then looking for help when you need more than just a kind of partner with you in this process. And so any last words of encouragement in this process as people, if this is the first time people are learning about this today, any last words of encouragement for them before we go?
You will mess up over and over again, and that's okay, because you get to repair it. That's what our parents oftentimes didn't know to do. Our parents didn't know to come back and say, I am so sorry. That's not how I meant for that to happen. And we know to do that. That's really good. And that's beautiful. Yeah. That's beautiful. That's secure attachment. Secure attachment isn't perfection. Yeah. It's knowing when we mess it up and going back and fixing it. That's secure attachment. And we can all do that. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Jamie DeLuna, thank you so much for joining us today and for all of this. You can find your work at the KPICD, and if people want to follow you online, do you have an online presence as well to be followed on? Oh man, maybe in 10 years when my kids are older and I have time, but no, I don't right now. I did a podcast. I have an episode of our TBRI podcast. That's my big online presence. Got it. There it is. That's awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This was so fun. Absolutely. We'll talk to you soon. Man, huge thanks to Dr. DeLuna for joining us today, for walking us through all of that. That's a extensive amount of content to cover in one sitting. And we got off the interview and just talked about how we could have kept going with that interview for hours. Honestly, there's so much to be learned and to talk about within that field of adult attachment styles. And I hope that it was productive for you and a great kind of first step, or maybe a second, third, fifth step for depending on where you are in your parenting journey. But just such great stuff today. And so hopefully that is a good starting point for you to jump out into this world of knowing yourself, and for you to begin surrounding yourself with the community of folks who are able to help you through this journey. We've got more great stuff coming on the podcast coming up, just some fascinating interviews, as well as our series jumping off on lots of topics that are talked about. Whenever we ask for specific topics from you guys, from our audience, I will say they're about the same 7 things that get brought up every single time. We decided this fall, why don't we begin tackling some of those issues? We're going to have a series we're going to talk about called the Let's Talk About It series, and we will tackle just some of the regular hot button issues in your home, in my home, in our homes, in the homes of people across the world. What do we do about defiance? How do we talk about puberty? What do we do about lying, manipulation, all those different things? We're going to walk through lots of those topics this fall. So stay tuned. Some of that stuff is coming up, as well as just some great guests and topics that you're not going to want to miss. And so, as always, for Kyle Wright, who edits and engineers all of our audio, for Tad Jewett, who created our music, and for everybody on the ETC team, this is JD Wilson, and we will see you next week on the Empowered to Connect podcast.